Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 12 of The Followers. This week we are changing direction from nutrition conversation to exercise. So we're going to start bringing you a little bit more information from an exercise perspective, training perspective, whether it's aerobic or strength conditioning. We're just going to talk around some of the different approaches and different things to consider when looking to put a bit of structure to your training, and maybe give a little bit of background and education around why you might choose different ways of going about your training. So we're back again with Shane and Murph. This week we're going to begin by focusing on hypertrophy, and I suppose we'll take it off from there. Where would we like to start?
Just in case anyone was wondering, hypertrophy is putting on muscle mass or making the muscles you have bigger. And to make it even simpler, it's just like getting jacked and tan. Now, I know feck all about that because I'm pale and ginger. But both of you have put on a decent amount of muscle mass over time. So maybe to start us off, we might start chatting about kind of the old ways. They're not really myths, but the kind of traditional ways people would use, the old bodybuilder approaches, and then we start looking at more kind of scientific methods to see, do they work? Did they just help kind of inform what people do now? Whatever like that. So Shane is a man who has put on some muscle in his day. What are some of the people you would have, before you went to a coach, what are some of the people you would have sought guidance from? What were their practices, anything like that?
I suppose, like most people, like anyone, kind of the gold standard when you go to put on muscle, no matter what kind of sport or anything you are, is going to be like your Arnold Schwarzenegger, that kind of category. So most people will start off pretty much, you find whatever body part you least like or want to put on muscle at the foot, and you hit that with as much volume as you can, as many days as you can. So usually that's what comes out with kind of your bro sets. So you see people in the gym 4 or 5 days a week, just hitting arms, just hitting chest. And like, it will make a difference. They'll come out with a bigger chest, they'll come out with bigger arms, but they'll be just very top heavy. And you'll see then, if they start to translate that into a sporting capacity, they're going to like, this is oversimplifying it, but they're nearly toppling over because their lower body just can't take that. It's a new adaptation. They've got this big giant upper body, but you can't really use it. Like, it doesn't translate. Fair enough, you have a powerful chest press, but what's that going to do if you have no legs to drive behind it? So if, say for example, if you're in a scrum or trying to make a tackle, you can have a lot of power through your chest, but if that's not balanced out to the rest of the body, you can't really transfer that into an effective hit or effective contact. So a lot of, I suppose, the traditional kind of sense of things is just throwing volume at the body parts that you see as weaker, whereas it should be more of looking to adapt your body as a whole. So you should be looking to build up your body in its entirety with more of a focus on those particular lagging points. That'd be the big point that I learned from working with a coach, was more that it's not going to be everything prioritized to your weakness. Say if you have a weak chest, for example, you can't prioritize everything around just building your chest, but you keep a balanced program, but you will always focus on chest exercises first. So if you start off with your bench press, you start off with things like that, it means that's when you have the most energy, so that's when you're at your most effective, but you're still balancing out the rest of your body, because if you build up one thing and let the rest lag behind, you're just pretty much switching between what your lag areas are, and you're never going to have that balanced physique you're looking for. So even if people don't really realize it, nobody wants just one, like nobody wants just a giant chest or just giant arms. They want a balanced physique. They're just focusing on what draws their attention first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I remember when I started going to the gym first, and most of the people there would have followed the kind of traditional bodybuilding splits. Nearly seemed to be set like day by day. Monday was chest. Tuesday was back. Wednesday, I'm following the days a week right here. Yeah, Wednesday was shoulders. Thursday was legs. Friday was arms. Get yourself pumped for the weekend. Most of them ended up taking Thursday off because you've been tired after training 3 days in a row. But they came back in, buzzed for Friday to do arms, then left it again, repeated it on Monday. And that's exactly what they followed. And they said just the more you can do and the more variations of the different exercises for chest or for back or for shoulders you could do, all the better. Now, there was often a lot of crossover there because what works, triceps and shoulders and chest will often cross over each other. There's not always a clear line between them all. So those areas ended up being very overdeveloped, where some of the back muscles only being hit once a week and the leg muscles being hit maybe once every 3 weeks ended up being very underdeveloped. Damien, what have you come across while obviously Shane has kind of had his bodybuilding experience to draw from. What have you learned from, more down the athletics and Gaelic football route when it comes to putting on muscle?
Well, I suppose first off, back when I would have started to go to the gym, I came across Arnold's Encyclopedia of workouts, and my God, that is some read. You will never be stuck for a new exercise if you're going through that. That's for sure. But again, it was very focused on building muscle, and it wasn't necessarily focused on how to transfer that into the playing fields, like into your athletics, into your GA, and like now in rugby where I work mostly. So I suppose my interests kind of skyrocketed towards lifts, like more like powerlifting, that kind of thing. So I kind of still that would still be my interest, not to compete in it or anything like that, but just for what you could say is my own ego. But I noticed that I learned very quickly that just chasing weight and chasing strength and power, that by keeping in that small rep ranges, 3 to 5s, and just trying to push up weight, that you eventually would meet some bit of a wall, or a blocking point, without being able to balance that up with some hypertrophy, like we're here to chat about today, to building that little bit more muscle, that you did need to work the two together. However, from a field sport perspective or an athletics perspective, um, you you can tend to over focus on your weightlifting, and forget, or not necessarily forget, but not necessarily apply the same attention to your skills for your field sports, or your just your all round ability to move. So your flexibility, your mobility, all these kind of things, that when you're super focused on looking at building your power, your strength, and possibly size, that it's not a case, it shouldn't be a case of just, right, well, right now we're working on power, then the next stage we're looking at size, and then we'll work on our skills, and then we'll work on our ability to move. That if you're going in blocks like that, you tend to kind of lose bits from each of them as you go, whereas they should kind of all work somewhere in a little bit of unison there together. So that would have been one of the biggest things that I learned hand from my own experience, trial and error myself when I was younger. And it's something that I still see, especially, as I said, most of my strength and conditioning work is in rugby, and I would still see that as something that is approached, that and you'll hear from guys, when they get onto the field session, that they're a bit stiff and sore, and when you look back at how they may have implemented the programs that you've put in place, you realize they might they might not be following them as astutely as they should, and maybe cut off things that maybe not are not as attractive, say like a mobility session, or they might kind of see like, oh, there's one leg exercise there on that day. I'll leave that off. I'll just stick to my upper body stuff, and then I'll a little bit, kind of like Shane was saying, that you can kind of get a little bit focused on overbuilding something, and especially in rugby where it's a big man kind of sport, a lot of people do kind of look from the waist up and go, geez, that's where I need to focus in on, and build up. Whereas, like, as we all know, it's, especially for rugby, your power is your legs. That's your base. That's where a lot of your explosiveness, your ability to tackle, your overall strength base comes from there. And yeah, you do need to work your upper body, but it's about balancing them all together and having an ability to run. So including, your field sessions there and your skill sessions, that across a week, that everything does get a good focus. That would be kind of a little bit of my own background in a kind of self-education, mistake through mistakes, really. I suppose a lot of people are kind of like that. We can all be given the information, the guidance on the right way to go, but until we've actually, put our hand on the hot stove, well, we don't really know how hot it is and how bad it is for us. So, granted, some people are smarter and they don't necessarily go that way, but for a lot of people, it is that case that you kind of have to see the mistake for what it is, and feel it. Okay, well, that didn't work. Maybe I should listen to my coach a little bit more, or look into new better ways of approaching training.
Yeah, sure. You don't really know how to make the perfect egg muffin until they've exploded on you a few times. You mentioned there, Damien, you would have done a lot of sets of 3 to 5 reps. Just, Jane, before you touch on what you'd normally do yourself or what your coach would guide you towards, what are the old school ways? What was the rep range everyone thought was, this is key?
So usually you're going to be looking for kind of the old school rulings, I suppose, would be 2 to 5 is going to be strength, 8 to 12 is going to be hypertrophy, and then above that is going to be toning or fat loss. Would be kind of like what you school from the old school stuff. It's fairly outdated now. Like you'd find very few coaches who still run off that. You probably get some people who would Google it or find old things, but for the most part, that's kind of gone by the wayside. So again, usually it's going to depend on your goals. Like there is obviously some truth to it. Like obviously if you are looking to increase your strength, you're going to need to increase your numbers in that 2 to 5 rep range. But it's just realizing that doesn't mean every single thing you do has to be in that 2 to 5 rep range. Or if you're doing hypertrophy, not everything has to be in that 8 to 12 rep range. So it kind of gives you a little bit more wiggle room to work towards increasing your numbers. So it means you can increase your numbers, and then say if you're doing something for 8 to 10 reps and then you're up in the weight and it only brings you to 6 reps, then you have the goal to reach that 8, or then you can keep pushing that newer weight to try and get to an 8 to 10 rep range. So it's a little bit more thought out now, where it's not just right now it has to be an 8 to 12. If it's not an 8 to 12, you're not going to be building hypertrophy. But they'd be kind of the old standards.
Yeah, so I think since an awful lot of what the bodybuilders did back in the day has been validated by a lot of research, and Brad Schoenfeld, who's the main man really when it comes to research and putting on muscle, getting stronger, what are the best methods across the board to do, and he put out a model for what causes hypertrophy. Now a couple of others slightly disagree with him, but just for now we'll go with it. So the 3 main things he says drives hypertrophy are increase in muscle. The first thing is mechanical tension, and we'll split that into 2 separate parts, then muscle damage, then metabolic stress. So if we're to pull apart mechanical tension, we could split that in 2. So you have that's basically the overall load you're lifting. So if it's squatting and you're squatting 120 kg, that's the load. Or if you're bicep curling 15 kg, someday I might reach it. And then the other part of mechanical tension is the time spent in that tension. So the time spent under tension will be guided by the amount of overall reps you're doing. That's kind of the main thing that drives it. Secondary to that then is muscle damage. The main muscle damage is going to come from the eccentric portion, or the lowering of the weight. So you pick up the weight in the bicep curl, then you let it back down, and you have the 1-2 count on the way up, 1, 2, 3, 4 on the way down. That muscle damage that probably causes the most pain also contributes to hypertrophy. And the last bit then is metabolic stress, which is basically just the pump you feel, the extra blood going around there. You might feel it after a really high rep set and stuff like that. There are 3 main things that drive it. When we look then across the rep ranges at how that's impacted, if you look at the Damien sets of 3 to 5, you're going to have really high load, so quite high mechanical tension. The actual time under tension is probably going to be a bit lower then. Also, the muscle damage is probably going to be a bit lower, just because it's very hard to build up the large amount of reps to cause the damage. The metabolic stress is probably a bit lower. If you go to the flip side of that and you're doing sets of 15 to 20, the overall load is a bit lower, but the time under tension is much higher. The muscle damage is that bit higher, and the metabolic stress is a bit higher. Are both of them going to lead to decent amounts of hypertrophy over time? Yes, definitely, just in slightly different ways. And then if we look then at the traditional hypertrophy range, 8 to 12 reps, that's where you can still have quite decent load, quite decent time under tension. There will be muscle damage and there will be metabolic stress. And that's probably why it fell in the middle somewhere, as being like, yes, this is your optimal, but both reps below that and reps above that will certainly make an impact on hypertrophy over time. And really, we're probably looking to train across that range over the course of a mesocycle, a season, a year, so that just even mentally you get those slight breaks from one type of hypertrophy or strength development to another. Obviously, if we focus on those 2 to 5 reps, you're going to have strength along with it. Whereas if you're focused on the 15 to 20 rep range, probably not as much strength. Now you're still going to get somewhat stronger, but muscle size increase will probably be more apparent than the strength increases. Would either of you have anything to add on that point? Those points?
No, I think you've covered pretty well there, Murph. There's absolutely nothing I could add to that could improve in any way, shape, or form.
Good. All right, as you can say in there, you can achieve hypertrophy through any of those rep ranges, really. But again, if you're starting at those 3 for 5 for certain reps, it leaves room for us to progressively overload. So a lot of mistakes that people make with hypertrophy is not having a plan. So they'll start off in their 3 to 5 rep range and they're like, right, I'm just going to do this until I'm as big as I want to be. Whereas they're not basing it off progressing, where either that is through the weight, through the amount of reps, through anything like that. There's no clear plan. So at least with the different range of reps and the fact that you can change that around and focus, maybe if you want to phase 1, focus on load, phase 2, focus a little bit more on mechanical tension, there is room to do that. So it means a clearer understanding of that means you're able to adapt it that little bit better.
Yeah, really good point there. Having an element of progressive overload, because that's what's going to lead to increases over time. Like we spoke before, there's a small breakdown in muscle that heals back at time, but stronger the next day. And even Shane there breaking into to say for the first block of 4 weeks, you focus on, I'm just going to try and stay on 4, maybe 5 reps, but drive up weight. Then the next block, I'm going to try and increase from 4 reps and slowly build that up week by week to 8 to 10 reps. So that instead of trying to focus on increasing both at the same time, you're just going to end up to too much fatigue and burning yourself out. So when it comes to just sets and reps, then we've looked at reps and rep ranges. How do we adapt to sets? Is there a certain amount? Because you'll hear of German volume training being mentioned, the 10 sets of 10 reps. You hear of people trying to keep it lower. Is it better to do 3 sets of 4 reps? The 1 set of 20? Do we have a preference, or what are some of the pros and cons of either?
True. So basically, I like to start with pretty much what you call like a base builder block. So if you have 4 weeks where they're on a fairly standardized, maybe 3 sets of around 12, so they can build up that base, because it's obviously going to depend on who you're working with or their kind of weightlifting background. But at least if you have that base, you can adapt from there. Because you see a lot of mistakes that people would make, especially kind of, you mentioned the encyclopedia there, Damon, that tends to have right from the get-go a lot of drop sets, a lot of supersets, a lot of different intensity techniques, which are obviously, they're all good. But if you think about it, I'm sure when Arnold was designing this, he was already 250 pounds with like a 50-inch chest, so he needed to push on that bit more. He had his base well and truly established. But if you're starting, especially if you're starting a hypertrophy program from scratch or like the start of an off season, you want to make sure you build up a base. So during that base, you'll find out your 1RM numbers, and you'll just have kind of low enough, I suppose, in around that 8 to 10 bracket for most exercises, maybe about 5 exercises, 3 sets. And then from there, you can push on to the next one, is where you can, usually I'll have a phase there where you increase sets. So that's just adding that little bit of volume to it. Then coming through the next phase, you can add some of those intensity techniques. So even when you mentioned German volume training, those different techniques are really just different styles of training. So it's more of a personal preference, or maybe something you haven't tried. Like some people just adapt better to really high volume stuff for hypertrophy. Some people adapt to lower volume with a much bigger intensity. Kind of partially depends on how you like to train, and then partially, I suppose, trial and error on how your body adapts to certain things. Because there's going to be no golden rule. Really, for each individual, is going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, no, I think a couple of things. Well, what are you training for is certainly something to keep in mind, but enjoying the training that you're going through is something that, right, exercise isn't necessarily going to be something that everyone jumps up or enjoy for, but we should still have some degree of enjoyment from what we're doing, and forcing yourself, say it. And I'm not picking on German volume here, but if I take a number of intercounty teams, Gaelic teams, over the past few years, have trialed it out at different points, and even speaking to I know, Murph, your face says it all, but even like speaking to players and stuff like that, doing that, like it's so boring. Whatever about the fact that they might be doing bench for majority of their session, like it can be mentally tough to push yourself for that type of training. And I like you said, Shane, like, I mean, it's just a different way to skin a cat. but it's possibly not the most enjoyable way. You probably, you might not get the most out of that session unless you plan on having people, in the gym for, 60, 70, 80 minutes, which doesn't need to be the case. You can get plenty of work done in a session in 45, 50 minutes, covering all bases, and where people feel like they're actually mentally they're being challenged, like they're not stuck on the one thing over and over. They're able to go, right, okay, I've just done, say, my squats. I know that I have, some walking lunges with maybe a lat pull down next. For some reason, they're like, okay, well, it's not necessarily about confusing the body either, like some people like to run with, but from an actual enjoyment perspective, I think that is something that some coaches don't necessarily keep in mind when they're designing their program. Right, they have a goal in mind, which maybe, like Shane mentioned there, depending on the period of the year that you're at, say your off season there, you might start in with your 3 sets of maybe 10 or 12, that hypertrophy range of 5, maybe 6 exercises. Then you'll push that on another notch. But then as you're starting to get closer to competition, where you're trying to, increase your power output, so you start to switch it down a gear, maybe get guys to move a little bit more weight and that. But if your if you're programming for something that's going to be mentally tough to build yourself up to do, you're not going to get the best out of your athletes there. I do think it's something, right. Okay, I get it's more down the psychology route of sport or training and exercising, but we can't just look at programming in a vacuum and just go, I don't mind it doesn't matter if you don't enjoy it, just do it, because you won't get the best buyback. You won't get people to get the best out of themselves and stick at it with I suppose the consistency that you need them to stick at it. Do any of you kind of feel like that's an important part, or maybe it's just me?
No,
And
I think that's a really good point. I was actually just talking about German volume trend there, because I was teeing myself up to talk about Mike Isertel's thoughts on volume. But just before that, on even like having buy-in from players, I remember seeing Ashley Jones, the former S&C with New Zealand, Australia, and the Canterbury's. He had kind of 4 levels of program he did with his players, and he said level 1, when he starts working with a player first and they're relatively new to gym work, he hands them a program and they work on it, and he just monitors them going through it on. Level 2, he goes to him with choices. I need you to do 5 exercises in the gym today. For exercise 1, here's 3 you can pick from. For exercise 2, here's another 3 you can pick from. So they have a level of autonomy in it. They feel like they own it a bit more. Level 3, they go to him with a gym program. He looks at it, makes 1 or 2 changes, but it's basically their gym program. So there's even more autonomy there. Level 4, I said, this was the classic Dan Carter, Richie McCaw. They came to him and said, here, we've enough to be thinking about. Just give us something to do in the gym, we'll do it. It came full circle. But he said it brought great autonomy and trust in the program, a lot more enjoyment, and the players really felt like, yes, this is the gym program I really want to do. Because ultimately, we can write the greatest program of all time, but if players don't feel it's worthwhile or not going to do it, it's completely pointless. Where I was trying to go with the German volume trend was that Mike Isertel, and he's a controversial enough character. If anyone follows him, he's RPDR Mike on Instagram. He's one of the founding members of Renaissance Periodization. They're a massive company in America, particularly working with weight-based athletes. But he has the concept of overall volume per body part. So you have so many sets you do a week for your chest, so many sets you do a week for your back, so many sets you do a week for your quads. And he says there's kind of an optimal range, somewhere going from like around 8 to 24. That's where you need to be. If you do less than 8, you're not really going to make any improvements. If you do more than 24, that's past your maximum recoverable volume. You're going to break down some stage, and then we're kind of float somewhere in between. And it's an individual thing after that. His favorite way of making progression over time is to start at 8. If you find that really easy to recover from, build up to 10 to 12 to 14 over a period. Once you start getting a bit fatigued, pull it back down, maybe 3 to 4 sets a week, and slowly start building it up again. And that's the main thing. That's the same as like calorie balance being the overall governing thing. But if you start digging into that a bit deeper, then you start spreading it out more among your week. So if you're training chest and you want to do 12 sets per week, you can do all 12 sets on the same day. And that would be similar to doing like German volume train, do your 10 sets, 10 bench press, and do 2 sets of flies. Whereas like that's really hard to recover from. And if you're only doing 10 sets in one day and you're only doing 12 sets in a whole week, like you have a long time to wait before you get to do that again. So if you instead split that into 5 sets of bench press on Monday and then 5 on Thursday, you can keep intensity much higher. And if we pull it back to the 3 original mechanisms of hypertrophy, the overall load and time under tension will be much greater because of that. So you're going to make far greater increases in strength then as well. And instead of having just 10 sets of bench press all week, 5 on Monday, 5 on Thursday, you could maybe do 3 sets of bench press and then 2 sets of chest fly on Monday. And then Thursday comes, you can do 3 sets of dumbbell press and maybe 2 sets of all-out push-ups. And there's much more exercise variation there. You still have the same overall amount of sets per muscle group in that week, but there's just more interest in doing different exercises. There's more room for making improvement across the different ones, because I'm a bit fatigued. Let's see how many push-ups I can bang out here, which is still a nice little challenge to test yourself, and gives the athlete, the person going to the gym doing the exercises, a bit more autonomy, but a bit more challenge into what they're doing as well. Yeah, you also mentioned there, Damien, about mixing up the exercises, and you mentioned doing lunges and lat pull down on the same day. What are some of the different thoughts on how we mix up exercises, how we train up body parts, how we split that across the week? I think we might pull Shane back in here again. What way do your own training tend to split it up, and then how does that maybe differ across when you're working with athletes based on the different sport or the background they come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's obviously a lot of touching on it first before we move on completely from it. Obviously, we've said that the one body part a day for kind of the week doesn't really work out super well. So again, you're just like you said, you're using all your reps for kind of the one body part in one day. There's also an element of there's only so much damage you can do to the muscle in one day. So for example, the way hypertrophy works in more of a scientific form is the myofibrils in the muscle split. So then one myofibril becomes 2. So again, those newer myofibrils, so of those 2 new ones, they're not going to really split again if you're doing all that volume in the one day. Whereas if you come around to, say, your next session during the week, they'll probably be recovered enough if you've looked after your recovery, look after your sleep, where they're in a position now to split again. So again, you can, by doing the same workload technique, the same reps and sets, you will achieve more from a hypertrophy point of view. Again, if you're looking after that recovery point of view, but I think there is a degree of nearly flogging a dead horse when you're on your fifth round of different chest exercises. Warranted, the different exercise might target a slightly different bit of the muscle, so hit myofibrils that may not have split earlier on in the session from like your earlier session, or from your earlier lifts. There's going to be an element, whereas splitting it over the 2 days is going to be much more effective from targeting the muscle overall as a whole. But so that's why I'd never really prescribe one body part a day training, especially for someone who's an athlete. Maybe in certain circumstances for a bodybuilder who's really trying to focus on building up a certain body part, but for overall the general population, definitely not. There's a few different kind of approaches. So the main ones I'd use at the moment are, if it's a bodybuilding or conditioning client, usually kind of a push-pull legs approach. So you'd use all the muscles that are kind of in a pushing motion. So that would focus mainly your chest, your tricep, your shoulders. There'd be a pull day, which would be your back, your biceps, a little bit of the rear delts as well, and then legs, where you'd encompass the whole of your legs. And then for an athletic population, usually for teams, it'll be full body workouts, but with a different targeted exercise. So again, you're going to have a lot of your focus is going to be on that first 2 lifts. So they're going to be specifically targeted for your bigger movements. So that's going to be your squats, your deadlifts, your bench press, things that I need them to be more powerful, more explosive with. And then the rest will just fill in the gaps of what we didn't hit with that first session. So it's going to be mostly full body and just making sure that you hit everything at least once in that full cycle. I don't know what you think about that, Damo.
No, I agree completely. That's the same approach that I have, in that, like, even if we take rugby for example, where like here in Ireland with club rugby, every game is pretty much on a Saturday at 2 o'clock. So most teams will train Tuesday, Thursday on the field. So like right grand, because time is tight. Sunday may not be a day where people do anything, especially if they're sore from the day before. They like, even like a lot of guys might just not actually go down that line. But having that Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday as your big days, for for getting any kind of real work in, because you don't want anyone to be doing too much on a Thursday ahead of a Saturday game, but you want guys to be able to get on the field, be mobile on the field, and be able to practice their skills and go through as much as they can. It's similar for Gaelic football even, and hurling, although the nights of training might alter from week to week, which it makes it a little bit tougher to program efficiently. But with rugby, when it is kind of a little bit more structured in their approach, those full body workouts and having a focus point of each one of those sessions is how I would approach it too. So I might have, say, when they're on the field on a Tuesday, even though I have them in the gym that day as well, because time is, there's only so many days in the week. But like that, the focus point of that day may be upper body. It may be their bench press, or if they're doing weighted pull-ups or something like that. That could be the focus point of that day, where it's not going to it's going to work the muscle, but it's not going to leave them feeling fatigued out on the field, like, say, maybe going through like a squat being the focus of their day, or deadlift being the focus of their day, where the overall taxing on the body could be quite a bit higher. So I would have the same kind of approach. The only thing that I do, the only area that I do kind of focus in on keeping reps relatively high kind of across the season would be anything kind of dumbbell related. I tend not to I tend never to get down into the below 8 reps for dumbbell work. And I like to keep that kind of consistently high. So you're up around the 8 range, or if it's particularly light, say it's something like rear delt flies or something, in that, like, it may be up as far as 10 or 12, where it's smaller muscle group. It's a little bit harder to focus in on and to get working. So I like to keep those kind of exercises high in that range. Maybe your dumbbell incline press or something like that could be at around 8. I just feel that when reps are much lower for dumbbell work, that that you don't necessarily get you don't get the same out of them as you do with your barbell approach to heavier weights, because often you may have an imbalance in guys, so they may have a stronger leg, stronger arm, stronger shoulder, whatever it might be on one side, and the other side just isn't able to keep up with the strength work there. So it allows them to try and even that out by keeping that consistent level of dumbbell work across the season, that little bit higher. But I also find that it doesn't tend to fatigue people as much as the higher reps with using the barbell for those for their main exercises as well. That's just that'd be the only thing that I kind of apply, not necessarily across the board, but in general, I kind of keep that in mind whenever I am programming for people. Yeah.
No, I'd be very similar to dumbbells, trying to keep them that bit higher rep, and even any kind of unilateral work, if it's kind of split squats or Bulgarian squats, I'll generally try to push them higher up the reps. In terms of the splits, it's going to be very dependent, obviously, on what the person has available to them in terms of time available to train. When it's in season, you're very constrained around what nights they have available, but also just managing the overall fatigue. Like, if they're wrecked from a game on Saturday, you don't have them straight into another gym session on Sunday as well. You also have to be mindful if they have families and stuff, and want to spend time with them. On the flip side of that, if you're someone who says, if the winter off now, and a lot of people have an extended winter here now ahead of them and may want to put on a bit of muscle size, what are some of the approaches there? Shane's mention of the legs push-pull, I can find that really beneficial, because you can train 7 days a week if you want. I wouldn't recommend it, but you can. And if you have a legs push-pull and you just have 3 set workouts and you just keep running them, don't put one to a particular day. Don't say, have to do legs on Monday and Thursday. If it's just, when I have the next available chance to train, I do legs, then push, then pull, then legs, then push, then pull. You can follow the 3 one after the other, or you can have a leg day A, leg day B, push day A, push day B, and whatever, to keep a bit more variety to it. There is the option as well. I would usually go with an upper lower, some form of split there, whereas other people, if it's just 3 days, I'll generally do a whole body push day, a whole body pull day, and then an upper lower split, and probably keep that upper lower split to predominantly dumbbell and unilateral work, and the other two more bilateral barbell style work. Have you any other approaches there? Or say someone is heading into this long winter now, has a nice bit of free time. What are some of the kind of practical tips you'd say? Try this maybe. Maybe Shane, you go first there, and then we'll let Damien have his go at.
Yeah, I'd say if you're coming in and focusing, I'd pick maybe three or four kind of core exercises that you're going to build all your programs around. So again, to a lesser extent, that filler stuff, or not filler stuff, but those secondary exercises that aren't going to be, so maybe focus on your bench, your pull-up, your deadlift, or a hex bar deadlift, and a squat, just because you're going to they're going to be mostly full body power exercises, so you're going to be able to gauge not just how much you're increasing in strength, but it's going to make sure that you're working the muscles properly. And then to an extent, you can add some variety with the other stuff. So again, if you want to include flies one week or include something else, focus more on the muscle or muscle group that you need to include in your session, rather than having, because again, as we've said, it can get stale if it's the exact same exercises over and over and again for the same rep range. So try add a bit of variety to it, but just keep a focus on those core. So make sure there's a core element that you are keeping in your program, so you can see yourself progress. And other than that, I'd just say maybe don't try jump out of the blocks. Like, don't add as much volume as you can in on day one and then have nothing else to kind of go with. So again, keep those weapons in your arsenal. So if you start off at that base area where you're just getting your strength, you do that for 2-3 weeks, you're feeling comfortable, then add a superset, then add an extra set, then add a drop set. So you have those weapons to play with. It's the same kind of approach you take if you're trying to lose weight over an off season. Where you start off by just controlling those calories. Then you still have adding extra cardio to play with. You still have cutting out. You still have those different techniques. You want to keep as much weapons as you can in reserve until you need them. Whereas if you go out of the gates with everything you have, you'll make huge gains straight away, but then you'll have very, very little wiggle room to go on. Then you won't be able to progress. So making sure that progressing over time is going to be your overall goal, not trying to focus everything on at once.
The only thing that I'm going to add on to what you said there, Shane, is because that's perfect. That's how you should be kind of thinking. If you don't have a coach, if you're trying to do this yourself, that's exactly how you should be kind of thinking. The only other thing that I would add to that is a bit like, if you're trying to say lose body fat across the off season or something, you'll focus in on your calorie intake, you'll focus in your food choice, you'll focus in on that specific thing. So if you have an area that is weak, if say you feel like, say there's a specific issue that you've noticed that is weak in you, say lower back, or say there's a bit of maybe struggling with mobility, you feel quite rigid a lot, you find it hard, maybe you pick up a certain type of injury over and over again, it might be a good idea to look at that and look at where that weakness might be coming from, and see, can you focus in on that as well, and not to just approach the off season as an opportunity now. And this is, I see it a lot. There's a lot of Gaelic football coaches or Gaelic coaches online. They've popped up everywhere, and some of them are quite good, but a lot of them just promote almost like a bodybuilding style, just get bigger and get more powerful, and there you go. And right, for some people, you may need to get bigger and more powerful. But at the same time, it's it's an intermediate kind of sprinting aerobic sport. It's not a big, massive big man power sport like, say, rugby. And I suppose here I'm focusing on Gaelic sports and soccer here, where it's, your ability to repeat sprints, your repeat sprint ability, to stay going at a low intensity throughout a game as well. That there's explosiveness, there's speed, there's power needed, yes, definitely, but just getting bigger isn't necessarily the right approach. And that is where I do see a lot of players who want to step up to the next level or want to push on a bit, that they take the approach of, I need to be bigger, I need to be stronger, and that this will translate to me being a better footballer. Or it could be, I need to be considerably leaner, in somebody who may be in around that 10-11% body fat range, and they're like, no, I need to be leaner, try to get down to that 5-6% body fat. That's not necessarily going to transfer into you being a better athlete in your sport. It may help, but it it won't necessarily change much. So what I would say is that before you start programming for your off season and programming to what you're going to look into, take a look at where you feel your weak points are. If you feel that actually, like, it may be a case that the training you're doing, that you are fit enough, that you're fast enough, you are powerful enough, you find that you actually have the strength that your sport demands on you, but maybe you feel like it could be something like your skills let you down, or your passing lets you down, your individual, your actual game specific tasks and skills leave you down. So take a good look at where your weakness is before you start to program in, going after big hypertrophy sets and trying to increase size, increase mass, and then increase strength. Take a look at maybe you experience hamstring issues quite a lot. Well, maybe you might need to take a step back from your traditional type of training and try to highlight where that issue may be coming from. And I know, Shane, you mentioned that that you've seen a few hamstring issues occur in people that wouldn't normally have them of late, and it's very easy to overlook things that may be a weakness. But now that we're going into what is for most of us and a repeated long off season, we've just come through COVID where people have experienced the longest off season of most of their lives, and they're going into another long off season, say in Gaelic sport, especially in Gaelic games across the line there. It would be a good idea to check out that and just take a look at yourself, take a look at where your weaknesses actually are, and try to focus on them in line with the overall approach too.
Yeah, critical look with some external feedback there can be a massive help in highlighting some of your weaknesses, because we can often be completely blind or biased towards them ourselves. Last thing to touch on then is maybe around rest times. Generally, people say, less than 60 seconds, get it done. The higher metabolic stress and motor system damage you have there, the better. Is that true, or could we be a little bit smarter with the amount of rest time we take between exercises with a hypertrophy focus? Shane, there, do you want to hop in again first?
Yeah, I'm never really too militant on rest times individually. I'd usually have kind of a time limit set for them to do a certain amount of sets, and what they're taking in between, it's mainly going to be on feel, because you don't want people firing right back into it when you know they haven't recovered enough, so they're not going to be able to lift as much, and then you can say, we're getting metabolic tension straight away again, but if they're not able to move that weight, they're not able to work as efficiently, it's not really much help to them. Same as if you see people waiting around doing nothing, taking ages, 2-3 minutes in between, unless they're powerlifting and going for a huge number, you don't want to see that either. So I won't have it on a clock as much, but it will be in and around that 60-second mark. But again, I'm not going to be too militant on it from that point of view. But while we do talk about rest, that's something I kind of wanted to drop up earlier, but I kind of forgot about it. Training's only one part of hypertrophy. So again, if you're focused on this for the off season, you can also make sure that you are getting your nutrition on point. You're going to have to be in a slight, if not more of a calorie surplus, and just making sure you're getting your sleep in per night. Because again, we can tell you can get the greatest program in the world. If you're not really nailing those other two elements, you mightn't see any results, but you'll definitely see less impressive results than what you could if you were that bit more clued in with your nutrition and your timings. Or your rest.
So I would say there to that we have covered episodes on that, so to be sure to give a listen back if this is one of the first episodes you've picked up on, just to give a listen back to that, because Shane, you've nailed it. And it's when you start to break down, when people ask, what do I need to be better, and you start going, well, I mean, what's your diet like, what's your sleep like, what's your water intake like, what's your general movement across the day like, then you kind of go, well, what's your training like, and what's your stress management like, when you start to look at people, whoa, there's a whole pile there. Now it seems like there's a mammoth amount of things, but each thing, these are things that we do every day. These are things that we kind of that are part of our lives every day. So it just takes it does require a little bit of focus, a little bit of thought, a little bit of, like you mentioned there, Murph, some critical review of what you're doing. And that can be very beneficial when you bring in someone external, like a coach, to have a look, as they will be a little bit more honest with you than you may be with yourself at times. Not across the board, but some people are very good at being too critical of themselves. But it can be handy there to get a little bit of a hand with stuff like that. So yeah, your recovery it's your overall lifestyle to make any kind of improvements in anything, whether it's sport, your normal day to day just existing. It's it's your lifestyle overall is what's really important. And if one of those things is well out of whack, say you get to bed late at night, for example, sleep is so underrated when you talk to people and when you talk to athletes. Like if you're going to bed late at night, after 12 o'clock because you're up watching TV and you're getting up for work at 7 in the morning, you're not getting great sleep. You're not getting sufficient sleep. You're going to bed. You're probably still a little bit wired from staring at the TV screen. Our phones come into bed with us. We might be scrolling Instagram or learning how to make egg muffins there late at night. You name it. There's a whole host of things that entertain us. We don't need to be entertained at that time in the night. You're looking to your 30 to 60 minutes before bed and keeping a regular sleep pattern, a regular kind of rough routine when you do get to bed is so important. And just starting to switch off, as you're like trying to limit phone usage, limit laptop and TV usage, screen time, basically trying to bring that down. It's so easily overlooked. It's crazy. But yeah, that's the big. I think you've nailed that there, Shane. That's a great point.
Just to give a brief little TLDR then at the very end of this, or TLDL maybe. Try and lift heavy weights, but with a moderate range across the reps. Realistically, 5 to 6 exercises per session is probably going to be enough, with a mixture of the different body parts, whether it be using barbells or dumbbells. Generally, my little tip will be do your first 2 exercises for 5 to 8 reps, do your next 2 for 8 to 12, and your last 2 for 12 to 15. Rest times for the compound exercises, so involving a few joints at once, like squats, deadlifts, like that. Probably take 2 to 3 minutes rest because it will lead to you performing more reps at a higher weight, which will lead to more muscle gain. As you work through it, you can start shortening it down to around 60 seconds. Even the last couple of exercises, if they're not for the exact same body part, you probably even do that as a superset just to save yourself time, and then recover with good food, good sleep, good water, and just managing the overall stresses in your life. Anything else on that?
No, I think that's great. I do have one thing though. I'm just a little bit confused before we sign off. Why is it that you didn't read the memo for the tank tops today, Murph?
I don't own one.
Sorry, could somebody send Murph a tank top?
I'll cut the sleeves off this Barcelona jersey.
Coming soon.
Right, thanks very much, everyone.
Brilliant. Looking forward to chatting to you next week.